The first thing I saw when I came downstairs was the empty space in the corner of the living room. It was a hollow ache in the familiar landscape of my home, a missing tooth in a beloved smile. The morning light, usually so soft and forgiving, seemed to spotlight the void, making it the center of my universe. My gaze shot to my daughter-in-law, Brenda, who was wiping the kitchen counter with a vigor that felt more like aggression than cleanliness. The rhythmic squeak of the cloth on granite was a tiny, sharp sound that grated on my already frayed nerves. She didn't look at me, but I knew. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, began to pool in my stomach. I knew. My voice, when I finally found it, was a fragile whisper, thin as a spider's thread. Brenda, where is the box? Comment on which city you're watching and subscribe to the channel because I guarantee there's more to this story than meets the eye. She finally turned, a bright, artificial smile plastered on her face. It didn't reach her eyes, which were hard and bright as polished stones. Oh, good morning, Eleanor. I did a little decluttering. You'll be so pleased. It feels so much lighter in here, don't you think? She gestured around the room with a sweeping motion, as if presenting a masterpiece. But my world was shrinking, the walls closing in on that one empty corner where my life's most precious memory had been stored. The box, Brenda, I repeated, my voice trembling now, each word a struggle. The large, cedar-lined box, with my wedding dress inside. Brenda's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a flicker of annoyance so quick I might have imagined it. Oh, that old thing? Honestly, Eleanor, it was taking up so much space. It was yellowed, probably full of moths. I did you a favor. She turned back to the counter, dismissing me as if I were a complaining child. The garbage truck came this morning. It's gone. Gone. The word hung in the air, a malevolent ghost. With those 5 words, the floor fell away from beneath my feet, and I was tumbling into a dark, soundless abyss. She had thrown my wedding dress away, and with it, the deed to the only home I had ever known. The home my husband, Arthur, had built for me with his own 2 hands, nail by nail, promise by promise. My breath caught in my throat, a silent, strangled scream. She had no idea what she had done. Or maybe a dark, terrifying thought whispered in the deepest recesses of my mind. Maybe she did. The silence in the room was a living thing, thick and suffocating. It pressed in on my ears, roared in my blood. My hand flew to my chest, my fingers clutching the thin fabric of my housecoat as if to hold myself together, to keep my heart from shattering into a million pieces. Brenda continued to wipe the already gleaming counter, the rhythmic squeak of the cloth against the granite a tormenting soundtrack to my imploding world. She was creating order while my entire life descended into chaos. A favor? The words finally escaped my lips, cracked and foreign, as if spoken by a stranger. You did me a favor? My son, Mark, chose that exact moment to walk in, coffee mug in hand, a cheerful morning you too on his lips. His morning routine, so reliable, so constant, was a brutal contrast to the seismic shift that had just occurred. He stopped short in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, his smile dying as he took in the scene. He saw the raw devastation on my face, the rigid set of his wife's shoulders. What's going on? He asked, his voice laced with caution. Your mother is upset about an old box I threw out, Brenda said, her voice dripping with a cloying, put upon patience. She turned to him, her expression a perfect mask of bewildered innocence. I was just trying to make some room. It wasn't just a box, I cried out, the words ripping from my throat. I turned to my son, my eyes pleading with him to understand the magnitude of the cataclysm. It was my wedding dress, Mark. Your father, the house, it was all in there. I was babbling, the words tumbling out in a nonsensical, panicked rush. How could I explain the inexplicable? How could I tell them that Arthur, in his final, pain-filled months, his mind clouded by medication but his heart still fiercely protective, had hidden our entire future in the silken folds of our past? Mark looked from my distraught face to Brenda's placid one, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. Mom, what are you talking about? The deed to the house is in the safe deposit box at the bank. We've talked about this. I shook my head, a frantic, desperate motion that made the room swim. No, it isn't. Arthur took it out. Years ago. He put it somewhere safe. My eyes locked on Brenda, who was watching me now with a strange, unnerving intensity. There was no sympathy in her gaze, not a trace of remorse. Only a cold, calculating curiosity. It was the same look she'd had the first time she ever walked into this house 5 years ago. A look that assessed its value, not its warmth, that measured square footage, not memories. The garbage truck, I gasped, the reality crashing down on me again like a physical wave. Mark, we have to catch the garbage truck. Mark, bless his heart, didn't waste time with more questions. He saw the raw, primal panic in my eyes and acted. He was a good son, always caught between his wife's modern sensibilities and my old-fashioned ways. But in a crisis, his loyalty to me, his mother, still flickered. He grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. Okay, Mom. Okay, calm down. We'll find it. What time did the truck come, Brenda? Brenda shrugged, a casual lift of her shoulders that was a sharp slap in the face. The nonchalance was a performance, and a cruel one at that. I don't know, an hour ago? Maybe more. Honestly, you too, it's just a dress. We can call the sanitation department, I guess. But I knew. An hour was a lifetime. An hour was enough time for my life to be carted away, compacted, crushed, and buried under a mountain of someone else's trash. As Mark rushed out the door, shouting back that he would drive the truck's route, that he'd find the driver, I was left alone with my daughter-in-law. The bright morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny ghost of my lost hope. Why are you so obsessed with this house, Eleanor? Brenda asked, her voice soft now, but it was a predatory softness, the kind a snake might use before it strikes. It's old. The plumbing is a nightmare. It's falling apart. Don't you ever want something new? Something easier? I sank into my armchair, the one Arthur always used to sit in. The worn floral fabric felt cool against my skin, a faint comfort. My mind flashed back to the day he brought me here, a young bride clutching a bouquet of wilting daisies, my heart thumping with a terrifying and wonderful hope. The house wasn't even finished then. It was just a frame, a skeleton of a dream against the wide-open blue sky. He had lifted me over the threshold of a non-existent door into a space that smelled of sawdust and fresh earth. I built this for you, Ellie, he'd whispered, his breath warm against my ear. Every nail, every board is a promise. This house is our promise. I looked at Brenda, at her perfect manicure, her expensive yoga pants, her face that showed no hint of the struggle and sacrifice and love that had been poured into these walls like mortar. You wouldn't understand, I said, my voice flat, hollowed out by grief. Her lips thinned into a tight, hard line. Oh, I think I understand more than you know. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and menacing. What did she mean by that? What could she possibly know? The grandfather clock in the hall, a wedding gift from my own parents, chimed 9, each bong a funeral toll for my stolen past. The wait for Mark's return was an agony. Every car that passed on the street made my heart leap, only to crash back down into the pit of my stomach. I replayed Brenda's words, her actions, over and over. The deliberate cheerfulness, the casual cruelty, the pointed questions. It didn't feel like a simple, thoughtless act of spring cleaning. It felt calculated. It felt like an attack. My mind, a frantic librarian, began pulling memories from dusty shelves. I remembered Brenda, a few months ago, talking to Mark in hushed tones in the kitchen, thinking I was out of earshot. We could pull some equity out of the house, she'd said, her voice slick as oil. Go on a real vacation. Maybe update this monstrosity of a kitchen. Mark had been hesitant, murmuring something about my wishes, but she had been persistent. I remembered her asking me, seemingly out of the blue, where I kept all the important papers. I told her they were at the bank. The lie easy on my tongue because it was what everyone, including my own son, believed to be true. Had she sensed my deception even then? Had that question been a test? I thought of Arthur, his hands gnarled with arthritis in his final years, carefully, painfully folding the thick, vellum paper of the deed. His face was pale and sunken with sickness, but his eyes were clear and fiercely determined. They can't take what they can't find, Ellie, he'd said, his voice a hoarse whisper that I had to lean in to hear. I'm putting this somewhere safe. Somewhere only love can find it. Remember that. Only love. He had been so afraid. At the time, I thought his fear was just a symptom of his illness, a paranoia that came with the pain and the medication. I thought he was afraid of banks, of lawyers, of a world he no longer felt he could navigate. So he chose the one thing he knew I would cherish above all else. The one thing he was sure I would never part with. My wedding dress. A symbol of our promise, now the guardian of it. But Brenda had not been bound by that promise. She had no love for it. She had seen an old box, an old dress, and she had disposed of it as easily as she would a carton of expired milk. An hour later, which felt like a century, Mark returned. I knew the answer before he even opened his mouth. His face was gray, the color of ashes. His shoulders were slumped in defeat. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He couldn't even look at me. I went all the way to the depot. I talked to the foreman. They'd already compacted the load from our route. There's no way. It's gone. I didn't cry. The shock had frozen the tears inside me, turning them to ice. I simply nodded, a slow, heavy movement of my head. Brenda came over and placed a hand on Mark's arm, a gesture of wifely comfort that looked obscene to me. "I'm sorry, honey." I had no idea it meant so much to her. Her voice was a perfect imitation of sympathy, honey sweet and full of regret. But when her eyes met mine over our son's bowed head, they were cold as ice. And in that moment, I was certain. This was no accident. The war for this house had just begun, and my enemy had fired the first, devastating shot. The days that followed were a blur of quiet dread. A heavy silence settled over the house, broken only by the forced cheerfulness of Brenda's chatter and Mark's clumsy attempts to mediate a peace that was impossible. He bought me a beautiful orchid, placing it on the little table where the box used to be. "To brighten the place up, Mom," he said, his eyes full of a sad, helpless love. I thanked him, but the vibrant purple flowers only seemed to mock the grayness that had taken root in my soul. The empty space was still there, a wound that no flower could cover. Brenda, for her part, began a campaign of subtle psychological warfare. It was a masterclass in passive aggression. She'd leave glossy brochures for luxury retirement communities on a coffee table, right next to my reading glasses. "Look at this one, Eleanor. A pool and a book club. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." She'd talk loudly on the phone to her friends, always within my earshot, about the housing market. "Prices are at an all-time high. It's a seller's market. You'd be crazy not to take advantage of it." Every word was a small, sharp jab, designed to wear me down, to make me feel like a burden, an obstacle. She wanted me out. She wanted to sell the house. And now, thanks to her, the one document that proved my unequivocal ownership, the one thing that gave me the legal right to say no, was buried deep within a landfill. My power was gone, and she knew it. She was savoring it. My nights were sleepless. I'd lie in my bed, the same bed I had shared with Arthur for nearly 50 years, and I'd stare into the oppressive darkness of my room, my mind racing. I tried to piece it together. Why was Arthur so secretive about the deed? "They can't take what they can't find," he'd said. Who were they? The paranoia that I had dismissed as a side effect of his illness now seemed chillingly like a premonition. Had he been trying to protect the house from something? Or someone? One afternoon, while Brenda was out at her yoga class and Mark was at work, I decided to do some searching of my own. Desperation gave me a strength I didn't know I had. I went to Arthur's old desk in the spare bedroom. It was a place Brenda had decluttered months ago, rearranging his books and throwing out old papers. But I knew she wouldn't have bothered with the heavy, locked drawer at the bottom. She didn't have the key. I did. A tiny, ornate brass key I wore on a chain around my neck, hidden beneath my blouse, its metal always cool against my skin. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. A click echoed in the quiet room. The drawer was filled with old account ledgers from his construction business, which he had closed down years before he got sick. I hadn't looked at them since he died. The grief had been too raw, the memories too sharp. Now, desperation was a stronger motivator. I pulled out the heavy, cloth-bound books, dust puffing into the air, smelling of time and secrets. I didn't know what I was looking for. A clue. A name. Anything to fight back with. I spent hours poring over the neat columns of figures, Arthur's precise, masculine handwriting a ghostly echo of the man he was. It was mostly a record of mundane expenses, lumber, concrete, payroll. But then, in the ledger from his final year of business, I found it, tucked away in the back pages. A series of large, unexplained payments to a company I didn't recognize, Henderson Holdings. The payments spanned months. And next to the final, largest payment, a note scrawled in the margin, his handwriting shaky and distressed. Nothing like his usual confident script, paid in full. God forgive me. Henderson. The name was vaguely familiar, a bell ringing faintly in the deep fog of my memory, but I couldn't place it. Paid what in full? And why would he need God's forgiveness for paying a bill? A cold dread seeped into my bones, a chilling premonition. This was something more than a simple business transaction. This was the secret Arthur had carried to his grave. Just as I was closing the heavy ledger, my mind reeling, I heard the front door open downstairs. Brenda was home early. My heart leaped into my throat. I quickly shoved the books back into the drawer, locked it, and slipped the key back around my neck, fumbling with the clasp. When I came out of the room, trying to appear casual, she was standing in the hallway, holding the mail. Anything interesting? I asked, my voice a little too high, a little too tight. She sorted through the envelopes, her expression unreadable. Just bills, bills, bills. Then she paused, holding a thick, official-looking envelope with a government seal. She glanced at the return address, and for a split second, I saw a flash of pure panic in her eyes before she masked it with a bland smile. She quickly tucked the envelope into her purse. Who is that from? I asked, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. Oh, nobody, she said, waving a dismissive hand, not quite meeting my eye. Junk mail. For a current resident, but I had seen it. In that brief moment, I had seen the logo embossed on the corner. It was from the county records office. Why would Brenda be getting mail from the county records office? And why would she lie about it with such ease? The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture so ugly, so monstrous, that I didn't want to see it. She wasn't just trying to wear me down with brochures and talk of selling. She was making moves. She was going behind our backs, behind her own husband's back, trying to find a legal loophole, a way to take control of the property. The sheer audacity of it left me breathless. But the look in her eyes, the lie on her lips, it was all the proof I needed. That night, the tension at the dinner table was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mark, oblivious as ever, tried to make small talk about his day at work, about a difficult client and a funny email he'd received. I could barely choke down my food, my mind whirring. Brenda was acting perfectly normal, a brilliant performance. She asked Mark questions, laughed at his jokes, refilled his water glass. But I watched her. I watched the way her eyes darted towards me when she thought I wasn't looking, a flicker of something sharp and assessing. She was a predator, circling her prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. I knew I had to tell Mark. I had to tell him my suspicions about Brenda, about the letter, about the strange entry in Arthur's ledger. But how could I? He loved his wife. He would see me as a bitter old woman, paranoid and grief-stricken, trying to drive a wedge between them. He would never believe that the smiling, charming woman he married was capable of such cold-hearted, reptilian deception. The opportunity came a few days later. Brenda announced she was going on a weekend yoga retreat with her friends. I just need to get away and recharge, she said, packing a small bag with an almost theatrical flair. You two will be fine on your own, right? Mark kissed her goodbye, and as soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, a fragile, blessed quiet descended on the house. This was my chance. I had to take it. Mark, I began, my voice unsteady. We were sitting in the living room, a chessboard between us, a game we hadn't touched since Arthur died. Neither of us had made a move in 10 minutes. We need to talk. About Brenda, he sighed, a long, weary sound, and ran a hand through his hair. Mom, please. Don't start. I know you two aren't getting along, but she's trying. She feels terrible about the dress. Is she? I challenged, my voice gaining strength from my desperation. Is she trying, Mark? Or is she trying to sell this house out from under us? He looked genuinely shocked. What? Mom, that's a horrible thing to say. That's ridiculous. We're a family. She wouldn't do that. A few days ago, I said, leaning forward, my voice dropping. A letter came from the county records office. She hid it from me. She told me it was junk mail. Mark's brow creased. The records office? Are you sure? Maybe it was for something else. A zoning notice or... And I found something, I interrupted, my voice dropping to a whisper. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I told him about the key, about Arthur's locked drawer and the old ledgers. I told him about the series of payments to Henderson Holdings and Arthur's cryptic, guilt-ridden note. As I spoke, I saw the doubt in his eyes warring with a dawning sense of deep unease. He wanted to defend his wife, his life, his choices. But the details were too specific, too strange to be dismissed as the ramblings of a grieving mind. Henderson, he murmured, the name rolling around on his tongue as if he were tasting it for the first time. Henderson. Mom, what was Brenda's maiden name? And there it was. The final, terrible piece of the puzzle sliding into place with a sickening thud. I felt the blood drain from my face. My breath hitched. Of course. How could I have been so blind? Brenda's maiden name. The name she had shed when she married my son. It was Henderson. Subscribe now, you won't believe the twist that's coming. The name hit the air between us and hung there, a poisonous cloud. Henderson. It wasn't just a name in Arthur's dusty old ledger. It was the name of the woman who shared my son's bed. The woman who had, with casual cruelty, thrown away my wedding dress. My mind reeled, frantically trying to connect the dots that formed a constellation of betrayal. Henderson Holdings. Brenda Henderson. What did it all mean? Mark was pale, his hands gripping the edge of the chessboard so tightly his knuckles were white. Her father. He was in construction too, he said, his voice low and strained, speaking more to himself than to me. He lost his business. A long time ago, before I met her. It was a bad deal, she said. It ruined him. A cold, sick feeling washed over me, the kind that precedes a terrible diagnosis. I looked around the room, at the sturdy walls and the polished hardwood floors, at the fireplace Arthur had built stone by stone with his own hands. This house wasn't just a promise between a husband and a wife. It was tied up in something else. Something dark and secret that had lain dormant for decades. A sleeping dragon that Brenda had deliberately come to awaken. Mark, I said, my voice urgent, sharp with a new fear. We have to find out what she's doing. We have to check her computer, her phone. I know it's wrong, but she's left us no choice. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrible, agonizing conflict. He was a good man, an honest man. My son. The idea of spying on his own wife was abhorrent to him. But the seed of doubt I had planted had taken root, watered by the chilling revelation of her family name. He nodded slowly, a grim, reluctant motion. Her laptop is in the study. We moved through our own house like thieves, our footsteps silenced by the thick carpet, the familiar space suddenly feeling alien and hostile. In the study, Mark sat down at Brenda's desk and opened her sleek, silver laptop. It felt like a profound violation. He guessed her password on the third try, the name of their dog, Buddy 123. A wave of sadness washed over me. Even in the midst of her deception, there were these small, mundane traces of their shared life, their love. Mark's fingers flew across the keyboard. He opened her email, his breath catching as he scrolled through her sent folder. And there it was. A chain of emails with a man named George Riley at a title company. And another chain with a real estate agent, Sarah Klein. The subject line of the most recent email to the agent made my blood run cold. Expedited sale of 124 Chestnut Lane. She was doing it. She was actively trying to sell my house. How is this possible? I whispered, staring at the screen, the words blurring before my eyes. You can't sell a house without the deed. Without the owner's signature. Mark clicked open an attachment in an email from the title agent. It was a scanned legal document. A petition to the court. Application for duplicate certificate of title. It claimed the original deed had been lost in a household accident. A small fire, it said. A blatant, vicious lie. The application was a request to have the court declare the original deed void and issue a new, clean title in my name, a title she would then undoubtedly try to pressure, trick, or even force me into using to sign the house away. But that wasn't the worst of it. Buried deep in the email chain with the title agent was the real bombshell. A message from Brenda, sent a week before she threw out my dress. George, it read, the title search you ran came back with a complication. It seems there's an old lien against the property from a defunct entity called Henderson Holdings. Can you find a way to clear this? It's imperative that the new title is clean. The original owner, Arthur Miller, is deceased, and his widow is difficult. We need to move quickly before she realizes what's happening. My knees felt weak. I gripped the back of Mark's chair to steady myself. She knew. She had known all along. She knew there was something wrong with the title, something connected to her own family. She hadn't thrown the dress away because it was old and moth-eaten. She had thrown it away to create chaos, to manufacture a believable story for her lie that the deed was lost. But she never knew the deed itself. The very document that proved the existence of the lien she was trying to erase was inside the box. In her attempt to clear the path for her scheme, she had inadvertently destroyed the one thing she needed to understand the whole, complicated truth. Oh my God, Mark breathed, his face ashen. He scrolled further, his expression shifting from shock to a deep, gut-wrenching pain that I felt in my own chest. He was reading the emails between his wife and the real estate agent now. They were discussing staging the house, potential buyers, and, worst of all, commissions. Brenda had been promised a hefty finder's fee if she could deliver the property unencumbered and ready for a quick sale. It was all there, in stark, black and white. A betrayal so profound, so meticulously planned, it stole the air from my lungs. This wasn't just about money or a bigger house. This was a long con, a revenge plot decades in the making. Her entire relationship with my son, our family. Had it all been a lie? A means to an end? A cold, calculated performance. Mark, I said, my voice trembling. What was the bad deal? The one that ruined her father? He looked up from the screen, his eyes hollowed out. Aged 10 years in 10 minutes. She never told me the details. Just that her dad's business partner betrayed him, left him with all the debt, and he lost everything. He died a few years later. She said he died of a broken heart, and I knew. With the sickening certainty of a star falling from the sky, I knew who his partner was. Arthur, my Arthur. The man who built this house as a promise. He had built it on a foundation of lies. The secret he took to his grave wasn't about protecting me from strangers. It was about hiding from his own shame. The front door clicked open downstairs. I'm home. Brenda's cheerful voice echoed up the stairs, a sound that was now grotesque in its falseness. My retreat got canceled. A water main broke. Surprise, Mark and I froze, our eyes locking in shared, abject panic. He slammed the laptop shut just as her footsteps started up the stairs. We were trapped. The confrontation we had dreaded, the one I thought we had a whole weekend to prepare for, was about to happen. Right now. Brenda appeared in the doorway of the study, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She took in the scene, me standing rigidly, Mark sitting at her desk, the guilty, stricken looks on our faces. Her smile vanished, replaced by a wary, defensive expression. What's going on? She asked, her eyes narrowing, darting from Mark's face to mine and back again. Why were you on my computer? Mark stood up slowly. He didn't have to say a word. The look on his face, a raw mixture of heartbreak and white-hot fury, said it all. You lied to me, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, tight with suppressed rage. You lied about everything. Brenda's mask of composure began to crack. She glanced from Mark's face to mine, and she must have seen that we knew. The game was up. Her shoulders sagged slightly, the fight draining out of her. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, but her voice lacked all conviction. Henderson Holdings, Mark said, and the name dropped into the room like a stone, shattering the fragile peace forever. Your father's company. My father's partner. Brenda flinched as if he had physically struck her. The carefully constructed facade she had maintained for years crumbled into dust, revealing the raw, wounded person beneath. He ruined us, she whispered, her voice choked with an old, bitter grief that was shockingly real. Your father ruined my family. He took out a massive loan against the business, a loan my father co-signed for. He promised my dad it was for a big expansion. But the business failed, and your father somehow walked away clean with this house while my dad was left holding all the debt. We lost our house. We lost everything. He was a good man, and your father destroyed him. I sank into a nearby chair, my mind struggling to process her words. Arthur, a betrayer? A thief? It didn't seem possible, but the ledger. The note, paid in full. God forgive me, he didn't walk away clean, I said, finding my voice, a strange strength flowing into me. He spent the last 10 years of his life paying it back. That's where all our savings went. That's why we never took vacations, why he closed his own business down. He was paying off a debt I never even knew existed. Brenda stared at me, her expression a maelstrom of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. What? No, that can't be true. My father died thinking. He was ashamed. I continued, the truth pouring out of me, tears finally beginning to stream down my face, hot and cleansing. He was too proud to tell me he had failed, that he had risked our home. So he hid it. He hid the debt, and he hid the deed. He put it in my wedding dress box because he was trying to protect this house from the lien, your family's lien, that he knew was still attached to it. The full, catastrophic irony of the situation descended upon us all in that silent room. Brenda, in her quest for what she saw as justice, had been trying to get a new, clean title issued. She threw away the dress box as a cruel, symbolic gesture to emotionally detach me from the house. But in doing so, she had destroyed the very deed that proved the existence of the lien she was trying to clear, the only concrete proof of the debt owed to her family. And I, in my ignorance, had been guarding a secret that wasn't a promise of love, but a testament to my husband's shame. The dress, Brenda whispered, her face ashen, all the color draining away. The deed was. In the dress? I nodded, the tears now flowing freely, a river of grief for my husband, for her father, for my son. He put it somewhere only love could find it. Or so he thought. A choked sob escaped Brenda's lips. She looked at Mark, her eyes pleading for an understanding that he was in no state to give. He was staring at the wall, seeing not the plaster and paint, but the ruins of his entire childhood, the memory of his father now fractured and remade into something unrecognizable. He had been lied to by everyone he had ever loved. His wife, his father, even me through my ignorance. Suddenly, a loud, official-sounding knock echoed from the front door downstairs. It was a sharp, impatient sound that made all three of us jump as if electrocuted. No one moved for a moment. We just stood there, suspended in the wreckage of our lives. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I'll get it, Mark said woodenly, his voice devoid of all emotion. He walked out of the room like a zombie, his footsteps heavy on the stairs, each one a thud of finality. Brenda and I were left alone in the study. We didn't look at each other. The air was thick with the ghosts of two ruined fathers, one wife's betrayal and another's ignorance. I could hear Mark's muted voice downstairs, then another, deeper voice I didn't recognize. A minute later, Mark reappeared in the doorway. Behind him stood a man in a crisp suit, holding a briefcase. This is Mr. Harrison, Mark said, his tone flat. He's from the city. He's here about the house. Mr. Harrison stepped into the room, his eyes surveying the emotionally charged scene with professional detachment. Mrs. Eleanor Miller? He asked, looking at me. I nodded numbly. I'm from the Department of City Planning, he said, opening his briefcase with a sharp snap. We're here regarding the property at 124 Chestnut Lane. It has been flagged. He pulled out a large, folded map and a file thick with papers. As you may know, the city is planning a new crosstown connector project. Your property, I'm afraid, is directly in its path. He spread the map on the desk, over the chessboard, over our shattered lives. A thick red line ran straight through our block, straight through the little square that represented my home. The city will be acquiring all properties on this block through eminent domain, he continued, his voice calm and practiced, as if he delivered this kind of death sentence every day. We sent out the initial notification letters 6 months ago. We have a signed receipt for delivery at this address. He looked pointedly at Brenda, who looked like she was going to be sick. The letter she'd hidden. It wasn't from the record's office about her fraudulent title application. It was this. The notice that none of our secrets, none of our lies, none of our pain mattered anymore. The fight over the deed, the lien, the sale. It's all irrelevant, Mr. Harrison said, though he was blissfully unaware of the Shakespearean drama he had just walked into. The house will be appraised and purchased by the city for fair market value, and then it will be demolished within the year. Demolished. The word hit me with the force of a physical blow. All of it. The fight with Brenda. The desperate search for the garbage truck. Arthur's secret shame. Brenda's long-held quest for revenge. It was all for nothing. The house, the object at the center of all our pain and deception, was going to be destroyed anyway. A strange, hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. I couldn't stop it. It started as a chuckle and grew into a wild, unhinged peal of laughter that echoed in the quiet room. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, a mad, grief-stricken sound. Mark stared at me in alarm. Brenda looked utterly broken. Mr. Harrison just looked profoundly uncomfortable. The house was never ours to keep or to sell. It was already gone. Arthur's promise, the one he had tried so desperately to protect, had an expiration date none of us could see. We had been fighting over the furniture in a burning building. The man from the city, Mr. Harrison, left after a few more minutes of explaining paperwork that no one was listening to. He left the file on the desk, a tombstone for a house that was still standing but already dead. When the front door clicked shut behind him, the silence that fell was different. It wasn't tense or angry anymore. It was hollow, empty. The silence of absolute, unequivocal defeat. Mark was the first to speak. He walked over to the window and looked out at the old oak tree in the front yard, the one Arthur had planted the year Mark was born. All this time, he said, his back to us, his voice thick. All the fighting. All the lies. He shook his head slowly. For nothing. Brenda was still standing by the desk, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold in the warm room. Her face was pale and blotchy from crying. "I'm so sorry, Mark," she whispered to his back. "I was so angry for so long. At my father for giving up, at your father for what he did. When I met you, I just wanted to get back what we'd lost. It was wrong, I know it was wrong. But then I fell in love with you, and that made it all so much more complicated. I should have told you everything from the beginning. I should have stopped." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. I didn't see the cold, calculating woman who had tormented me for months. I saw a girl whose father had died of a broken heart. I saw a woman who had been twisted by grief and a misguided, obsessive desire for justice. Her methods were cruel, her deception unforgivable, but the pain at the root of it. That I understood. Arthur's secret had wounded her family as much as it had mine. We were two sides of the same tarnished, tragic coin. I stood up and walked over to the desk, my legs unsteady. I picked up the old ledger, the one with Arthur's shaky handwriting. I ran my fingers over the words, paid in full. God forgive me, he had tried. In his own flawed, secretive, prideful way, he had tried to make things right. He had carried the weight of it all by himself, to protect me from the shame of it, and in doing so had created a legacy of pain that had poisoned us all. He was a good man, I said softly, looking at Brenda. But he was a proud man. And he was scared. He made a terrible mistake, and he spent the rest of his life trying to fix it in the only way he knew how. In secret. I closed the ledger. He failed your father. And by keeping his secret from me, he failed me too. And I said, my gaze moving from Brenda to Mark, we have failed each other. There was no easy forgiveness in that room. The wounds were too deep, the betrayals too raw. The love between my son and his wife was shattered, perhaps irreparably. My own love for my late husband was now colored by a sad, complicated truth. The house, the silent witness to our lives, was condemned. But in that moment of total, comprehensive loss, something shifted. The fight was over. There was nothing left to fight for. All that remained was the three of us, standing in the ruins. Weeks turned into a quiet, somber month. Brenda moved into the spare room. She and Mark spoke in hushed, pained tones, like strangers learning a new language. They were navigating a new, treacherous landscape, and I didn't know if they would find their way back to each other. But they were talking. For the first time since I'd met her, they were truly talking, without secrets or pretenses. Brenda and I found a strange, unspoken truce. We'd sit in the kitchen, drinking tea in silence. There were no apologies offered and no accusations made. There was just a shared understanding of the crushing weight of the past. One day, she found me looking through an old photo album in the living room. She paused behind my armchair, looking over my shoulder at a picture of a young, smiling Arthur standing proudly in front of the half-built house. "My dad had a smile like that," she said quietly. It was a small offering, a single stone laid across the chasm that had separated us. The city sent the appraisers. They walked through the rooms with clipboards and measuring tapes, their voices echoing in the increasingly empty spaces as we began to pack. They were reducing 50 years of life and love and sorrow into a monetary figure. The number they gave us was fair, generous even, but it felt like a profound insult. How do you put a price on a child's first steps on these floors, on late-night conversations by the fire, on the ghost of a husband's laughter in the hall? When the check came, we used a portion of it to settle the old, forgotten lien from Henderson Holdings. We sent it to Brenda's mother, who was still living in a small, rented apartment in another state. It wasn't a solution, but it was an acknowledgement. A closing of a painful chapter that had stayed open for far too long. The rest of the money sat in the bank. It was our future, but a future none of us had chosen. Mark and Brenda decided to use their share to go to counseling and rent a small apartment of their own, to try and rebuild from scratch, away from the ghosts of Chestnut Lane. I chose to buy a small condo in one of those communities Brenda had once taunted me with. It was new and clean and had no ghosts. On the day I moved out of 124 Chestnut Lane for the last time, the three of us stood on the sidewalk and looked at it one last time. The windows were dark. The lawn was already looking overgrown. It already looked like a memory. It was a beautiful house, Brenda said, and this time her voice was full of a genuine, aching sadness. Yes, I said, taking a deep breath of the free, open air. It was. It was built on a promise, broken by a secret, and lost to circumstances beyond any of our control. But in its final, tumultuous days, it gave us something unexpected. It forced us to face the truth. It taught us that the foundations of a family are not made of brick and mortar, but of honesty and forgiveness. And those are things you can't throw away in a box, and that no bulldozer can ever demolish. They are the things you must choose to carry with you, to rebuild, no matter the cost. Comment which part of the story left you speechless.